Who could imagine that a poor girl, who only came to a free cinema night because she couldn't afford the ticket, would sit next to a stranger in the dark? She thought it was just another seat, just another voice in the silence. But the man beside her wasn't ordinary. He was a millionaire who had lost his sight, searching for something even money couldn't buy. One whisper, one laugh in the shadows, and a love story began where no one expected it. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The cinema hall was unlike anything Emma had ever seen, though she wouldn't be seeing much at all tonight. The event was called Movies in the Dark, a strange, experimental evening where the audience wore soft black blindfolds, forcing them to experience the film with only sound, whispers, and imagination. For most people, it was an adventure, a novelty. For Emma, it was simply a chance to watch a film without paying. Her friend had slipped her an extra ticket, a promotion from a local radio contest. She almost didn't come, but something about sitting in the dark where no one could judge her worn shoes or faded coat felt like freedom. She tightened her cardigan around her shoulders as she stepped inside. The air smelled of buttered popcorn and freshly cleaned carpets. People laughed nervously, bumping into each other as they found their seats. A staff member guided Emma with a small flashlight, pointing toward a row in the middle. "Seat D14, the woman whispered. Emma nodded, mumbling thanks. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and slid into the chair, clutching the blindfold that had been given to her at the entrance. To her right, the seat was empty. To her left, someone had already settled down. Tall, judging by the way his knees almost touched the seat ahead. His presence quiet but commanding. She caught the faintest whiff of cedar cologne, not too strong, the kind that clung softly to a man's skin instead of his clothes. For a second, Emma thought about shifting to another seat. She hated awkward silences with strangers. But before she could decide, the lights dimmed, and an announcer's voice filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Movies in the Dark. Please place your blindfolds on now. For the next 2 hours, you will experience cinema without sight. Listen carefully, imagine deeply, and let your hearts fill in the rest." Emma tied the blindfold over her eyes. Darkness wrapped around her instantly. The world narrowed to sounds. Whispers, giggles, the rustling of coats. Her heartbeat seemed louder than all of it. Beside her, the stranger didn't move much. No cough, no shuffle of candy bags, just steady breathing. When the first sounds of the film crackled through the speakers, a rainstorm, a rushing river, Emma relaxed a little. But then came a faint tap. The man next to her had shifted, his cane. Yes, she realized it was a cane, brushing softly against the floor. She frowned in the darkness. A walking cane? At first she thought of an elderly man, but his scent, his posture, even the sound of his breath didn't match that image. Curious, she leaned the slightest bit to the left. And then it happened. A line of dialogue from the film was delivered with such over-the-top seriousness that Emma couldn't hold back a laugh. It wasn't loud, just a small, unexpected burst. To her horror, it echoed in the silence around her. She covered her mouth quickly, but beside her, the stranger let out a low chuckle, warm and genuine, as if her laughter had freed him from a weight. "Sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't be," came his reply, smooth, deep, but careful, as though he measured every word. It was funny. The sound of his voice startled her. It wasn't the tired rasp of someone old, nor the casual tone of a bored student. It was rich, commanding, yet softened at the edges. A voice that belonged to someone who had lived through storms and still stood tall. The film continued. Emma tried to focus, but she found herself glancing in his direction. though she could see nothing. The darkness made it easier to speak, easier to forget how clumsy words could sound under bright lights. "This part feels like a play," she murmured half to herself. "Like we're listening to a stage with no actors." He tilted his head toward her voice. "You think so?" "Yes," she said, a little braver. "You can almost see it if you try hard enough. The way they move, the way they smile." Silence followed, but not heavy silence. It was the kind that stretched like a thread between two people, fragile and new. Then he spoke, softer this time. "Describe it to me, the way you imagine it." Emma hesitated, but something in his tone, not a demand, not pity, but an invitation, pushed her forward. She closed her eyes tighter beneath the blindfold, as if that could help. The scene right now: the rain is falling, and the woman is walking with her coat open. She looks tired, but she's not giving up. The man across from her keeps pretending to check his watch, but really he's waiting for her to notice him. It's almost sad, but kind of beautiful. The stranger's breath hitched faintly, so faintly she might have imagined it. Then a whisper, "Beautiful." Yes. For the first time that night, Emma felt her own heart steady. She wasn't just filling the silence anymore. She was painting something real, something he wanted to hear. And in the dark cinema, she forgot her cheap coat, her unpaid bills, her shoes with worn soles. She was just a voice, and her voice mattered. She smiled beneath the blindfold, maybe for the first time in years. The movie played on, a stream of sound and silence broken only by the occasional cough or shuffle in the audience. But for Emma, the story on the screen was no longer the most important thing happening. It was the man beside her, leaning slightly toward her words, as if each one was a lifeline. She felt the weight of it, how intently he listened, how carefully he caught the pauses in her sentences. At first she wondered if she was intruding, if her silly habit of describing things in her imagination annoyed him. But then came the smallest proof that it didn't. A low hum, a soft chuckle at her observations, the shift of his shoulders when he relaxed into her presence. The darkness felt less like a barrier and more like a secret shelter. Here, no one could measure her clothes. No one could see her nervous hands or judge her tired face. Here she was only a voice, and for the first time in a long while, being just a voice was enough. "The music right now," she whispered. "It sounds like the kind of song that belongs in a train station. You know, that part where someone leaves, but another person stays behind." He exhaled slowly, the sound almost like agreement. "I hear it too, like a goodbye hidden inside the notes." Her chest tightened. How could a stranger's words feel so familiar? She swallowed, realizing her mouth had gone dry. Do you like watching films like this? In the dark? I mean, I don't have a choice," he answered quietly. The honesty of it stunned her. No humor, no self-pity, just truth laid bare. Emma wanted to ask more, but something about the way he said it told her he wasn't sharing details with anyone easily. So she stayed silent for a moment, giving him space. The film shifted scenes, footsteps on gravel, the scrape of a door opening, a woman's voice breaking with emotion. Emma's throat burned. "She sounds like she's about to cry," she murmured. "She is," he said. His tone was so certain it startled her. He spoke as if he could see the woman's face. "How do you know?" she asked before she could stop herself. He tilted his head toward her, and for a moment the world felt as if it had paused just for them. "Because I know the sound of someone who's holding too much inside. It's not about eyes. It's about listening." Her breath caught. She didn't know this man, didn't even know his name, yet she felt as though he had peeled away something inside her she usually kept hidden. She thought of nights when she had sat in her tiny apartment, holding back tears so her sick mother wouldn't hear. She thought of bills folded and unfolded, the ones she didn't know how to pay, and she wondered, could he hear all of that in her voice too? She shifted slightly in her seat, clutching the edge of the blindfold as if it could anchor her. You listen differently than most people. A faint smile touched his lips. She couldn't see it, but she heard it in his voice. That's the only way I know how to live now. Emma didn't understand fully, but she felt the weight in his words. Whoever he was, whatever had happened, he carried a silence deeper than anything she had known. Minutes stretched into an hour. The film's story twisted and turned, but for Emma and the stranger, their own story had begun. She kept describing little details. The way she imagined a character's coat swaying in the wind, the clumsy rhythm of footsteps, the awkward kiss that made her laugh under her breath. Each time he responded, sometimes with a single word, sometimes with silence that was fuller than speech. At one point, she forgot herself completely. This actor, she said softly, I think he's pretending to be brave, but his hands are probably shaking. You can always tell when someone is scared but trying to hide it. There was a pause. Then the stranger whispered, You notice everything, don't you? Emma's face heated in the dark. Maybe. Working in a bookstore teaches you to see little things. People reveal themselves by the way they hold a book, the way their eyes move across the page. Stories aren't just in words. They're in people. He was quiet for so long she wondered if she had said too much. But then his reply came, low and certain. You're telling me more than you realize. Her pulse raced. Was he right? She pressed her lips together, trying to steady her thoughts. The final scene of the film unfolded. Music swelling, voices breaking, the sound of rain again, and then silence. The audience shifted, pulling off blindfolds as the credits rolled. Light slowly seeped back into the room, dim but enough to make Emma blink. She slipped her blindfold down around her wrist and glanced to her left. For the first time, she saw him. A man with dark hair touched by silver near the temples, a jaw set in quiet strength, and eyes that were pale, unfocused. Eyes that told her the truth before he even spoke. Her stomach flipped. He turned slightly, as if sensing her gaze. His hand brushed the cane leaning against his seat. And in that moment, Emma realized he hadn't been watching the film at all. He hadn't been pretending. The darkness that surrounded her for 2 hours was his everyday. Yet still, he had listened to her voice as if it gave him something more than sight ever could. She froze, torn between shock and a strange, unexplainable pull toward him. He, however, only gave a faint smile. Thank you, he said simply. For what? She wanted to ask. For talking? For staying? For treating him like a man, not a shadow. She didn't know. But before she could answer, the audience began to move, chatter filling the aisles. He reached for his cane and stood carefully, steady but deliberate. Emma's heart thudded as she watched him. The film had ended, but for her, something far more dangerous had just begun. The crowd spilled into the hallway, voices rising in excited chatter as people pulled off their blindfolds and compared experiences. Emma clutched hers in her hand, still feeling the faint heat in her cheeks. The stranger beside her rose slowly, his cane tapping once against the floor before finding its rhythm. The sound of it struck her chest, sharp and steady, like a heartbeat amplified. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to slip into the crowd, vanish before anything more could happen. After all, she didn't know him. She shouldn't care. And yet, her feet betrayed her. Instead of walking away, she found herself waiting as he steadied himself. The hallway glowed with warm golden lamps, posters of upcoming films framed on the walls. Emma noticed how people stepped aside politely when they saw his cane, but many stole glances. some pitying, some curious. He ignored them all, his jaw set in quiet defiance. She cleared her throat softly. "Would you like some help finding the exit?" His head tilted slightly toward her voice. A small smile curved his lips. "Only if you don't mind walking slowly." Something loosened in her chest. "I don't mind." So they moved together through the shifting crowd, her steps unconsciously matching his. Emma stayed just close enough so he could hear her, describing little details when the noise became overwhelming. "There's a group of teenagers on our left. They're blocking the way, but they'll move in a second. The exit's ahead, big glass doors with people pouring out." He nodded, adjusting his pace. "You make it sound easier than it is." She gave a tiny laugh. "That's the trick of working in a bookstore. When you're buried in chaos, you learn to sort things into neat little stories." They reached the doors. The night air rushed in, cool and damp, carrying the smell of rain-soaked pavement. Outside, neon lights reflected on puddles like broken glass. People hurried by with umbrellas, taxis hissed along the street, and laughter from nearby cafes spilled into the open. Emma drew in a breath of freedom, the city alive around them. He lifted his face slightly, as if feeling the shape of it in the air. "It's raining, isn't it?" "Yes," she said softly. "Not heavy, just enough to make everything shine." He chuckled under his breath. "I always liked rain. It tells you more than sun ever could." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because everyone shows their truth in the rain. Some curse it, some dance in it, some don't even notice. But no one hides. You can hear it in their footsteps." The way he said it made Emma shiver. Not from cold, but from the strange gravity of his words. She hugged her cardigan closer, unsure what to say. For a moment, they stood together at the edge of the cinema steps, the crowd thinning around them. He leaned on his cane, composed but slightly weary. She watched the way droplets slid along his dark hair, the way his lips parted as though tasting the air. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you have somewhere you need to rush off to?" Emma hesitated. The truth was that she did. Her mother would be waiting at home, and she still had to heat leftovers for dinner. But for once, she didn't want to rush. She didn't want the moment to end at the theater door. "Not really," she whispered. His faint smile deepened. "Would you join me for a coffee then? Somewhere nearby. I promise I don't bite." Her heart stumbled. Coffee? With him? She glanced at her bag, where her nearly empty wallet lay hidden. Panic threatened to flare. She couldn't even afford a sandwich in the cafes around here. But when she looked back at him, she realized he wasn't asking as a formality. He was genuinely waiting for her answer. His pale eyes focused somewhere beyond her, but his expression open. Emma swallowed hard. Coffee sounds nice. They walked side by side down the street, his cane tapping softly against the slick pavement. Emma guided him lightly, pointing out uneven curbs or steps without drawing attention to it. She noticed how he carried himself, shoulders straight, movements deliberate. A man who refused to be defined by weakness. They stopped at a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Warm light glowed from its windows, steam fogging the glass. Emma hesitated at the door, her throat tightening. What if the prices were too high? What if she embarrassed herself? He must have sensed her pause because he spoke gently. "Don't worry. It's a simple place. You'll like it." Inside, the cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. A few students sat hunched over laptops, couples whispered over mugs, and soft jazz hummed from speakers overhead. They took a seat near the corner. Emma noticed he found the chair without fumbling, lowering himself with practiced ease. He rested his cane against the table and folded his hands neatly. For a moment, silence stretched. She fiddled with the menu, her pulse racing. Finally, she dared a glance at him. His eyes were pale, unfocused, yet strangely captivating. They didn't roam aimlessly. They held steady, as if listening to something beyond sight. "Do you want me to read the menu for you?" she asked. He smirked faintly. "That would be helpful, unless you think my ordering skills are impressive enough without it." She laughed quietly, tension easing. She began reading aloud, stumbling once or twice when the descriptions grew too fancy. He didn't interrupt, just listened, occasionally making her laugh by asking, "Does the cake look as dramatic as it sounds?" Emma caught herself smiling too much. Her cheeks warmed, but she couldn't stop. When the waitress came, he ordered a black coffee and gestured for Emma to choose anything she wanted. Emma panicked again, fingers tightening on the menu. The cheapest option was tea. She pointed quickly. "Just this." The waitress nodded and walked away. He tilted his head. "You don't like coffee?" "I do," Emma admitted, embarrassed. "But tea is fine." Something in his expression shifted, as though he understood more than she had said. But he didn't press. Instead, he leaned back, listening to the jazz, his face calm. Emma studied him across the table, wondering, who was this man who carried himself with such quiet strength? Why did she feel drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain? And why did her voice, usually so small, suddenly seem to matter to someone who couldn't even see her? For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. And that realization terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. The waitress set their drinks down with a gentle clink. A small swirl of steam rose from his coffee, sharp and dark, while Emma's teacup glowed amber beneath the dim cafe lights. She wrapped her hands around the porcelain, grateful for the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. Across from her, the stranger sat with perfect composure, as if even in blindness he commanded the space around him. His cane leaned against the table, and the soft jazz painted a cocoon around them that made the world outside blur. Emma took a hesitant sip of her tea. She needed to say something, anything, to ease the flutter of nerves in her chest. "So, do you come to events like that often?" The movie In the Dark. His lips curved faintly, though his pale eyes didn't shift. "More often than most people would expect. It's one of the few places where no one stares. In the dark, everyone is equal. For 2 hours, I'm not the man with a cane. I'm just another seat in the crowd." Emma's throat tightened. The simplicity of his answer carried a heaviness she hadn't expected. She nodded slowly, forgetting for a moment that he couldn't see the gesture. "That makes sense," she whispered. "Sometimes I wish life had more of that darkness. Not the sad kind, just the kind where no one's watching, no one's judging." His head tilted slightly toward her, intrigued. "Why? You don't like being seen?" The question stung because it was too close to the truth. Emma forced a small laugh. "It's not that. I work in a little bookstore. Most days no one notices me at all, unless they're asking for change or trying to get a discount. And when they do notice, it's not for anything special." He leaned forward, his hands resting loosely on the table. "Then you don't realize what you have." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You described a movie better than most critics I've ever heard. You noticed every pause, every silence. You gave the film a second life just by speaking. That's not ordinary." Emma's breath caught. Compliments were rare in her life, rarer still ones that felt genuine. She lowered her gaze to her teacup, afraid he might hear how fast her heart was beating. "I just talk too much sometimes," she murmured. "Not too much," he corrected softly. "Just enough." Silence fell, not awkward but charged, as though each word they'd spoken still hung in the air between them. The jazz in the background shifted to a slow piano melody. Outside, rain streaked down the cafe windows, drawing crooked lines across the glass. Emma wanted to ask him so many things: his name, what he did, why he spoke like someone who carried both power and sorrow. But the fear of prying held her back. Instead, she tried a safer question. What about you? What do you do outside of movie nights in the dark? He hesitated. She noticed it instantly, the way his jaw tensed, the faint pause before he spoke. Investments, he said finally, the word clipped too neat. Emma tilted her head. That sounds important. It's work, he replied, as if closing the door to further inquiry. She sipped her tea again, covering her disappointment. He didn't want to talk about it, that much was clear. Still, something about the way he avoided the question made her curious. Most men bragged about their jobs, but not him. It was almost as if he was hiding. Do you like it? She asked gently, testing the waters. He gave a humorless laugh. Liking it doesn't matter. Keeps me busy. It keeps me from thinking too much. Emma's chest ached. She wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand, to let him know he wasn't alone in carrying unspoken burdens. But she stopped herself. She barely knew him. What right did she have? So she tried something different. In the bookstore, I see people who come just to escape. They sit in the corner with a book they never buy, just holding it like a shield. Sometimes I think work is the same thing. A shield. Do you think that's true? His head turned toward her voice, his pale eyes strangely intense. Maybe, but shields can also become prisons. Emma felt a shiver crawl down her spine. There was something in the way he said it, as if he was speaking about himself, about years of living behind walls no one dared to touch. She wanted to ask him more, to press deeper, but the waitress returned with their pastries. The moment broke. Emma forced a smile, thanking her, and pushed the plate closer to him so he'd know where it was. He touched the edge of it carefully, then found the fork. You notice everything, don't you? He said, his tone gentler now. She shrugged, cheeks warming. Habit. When you don't have much, you learn to pay attention to the little things. Sometimes that's all you have. His lips curved into the faintest smile. Sometimes the little things are everything. For a while, they ate in quiet companionship. Emma nibbled her pastry slowly, savoring it more than usual because she wasn't sure she'd ever sit in such a cafe again. He drank his coffee with deliberate sips, his posture calm but his expression unreadable. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew something fragile had begun. Something that could either grow into light or shatter with the weight of truth. Emma didn't know his name. He didn't know the depth of her struggles. And between them stood an invisible secret, a fortune he hadn't confessed, a world she didn't imagine existed. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the city into a haze of silver. Inside, Emma felt a storm of her own begin to gather, one she couldn't yet name. The cafe grew quieter as the evening stretched on. A few students packed up their laptops, and the couple near the window left, leaving only the soft hum of rain against the glass and the slow piano from the speakers above. Emma felt as though the world had shrunk to the small table between them, to the steady rhythm of his voice and the way he leaned just enough toward her words as though they anchored him. She set her teacup down, tracing the rim with her finger. Do you ever miss it? She asked softly. Miss what? His voice was calm, but she heard the weight behind the question. Seeing. The word felt dangerous on her tongue, but she couldn't hold it back. Silence fell for a moment, heavy but not angry. He shifted slightly in his chair, his fingers brushing the handle of his cane as if to remind himself it was there. Every day, he admitted quietly, but not in the way most people think. I don't miss colors or shapes. I miss the way people looked at me before. I miss walking into a room without feeling the air change. I miss being someone others didn't pity. Emma's throat tightened. She had seen the glances earlier in the hallway. The pity, the hesitation. She hated them now, hated how easily people judged what they didn't understand. I don't pity you, she said suddenly, the words bursting out before she could stop them. He tilted his head toward her, his pale eyes almost searching. Then what do you see? Her cheeks burned, but she didn't look away. I see a man who listens better than anyone I've ever met. Someone who makes me feel like my voice matters. That's rare. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. His hand, resting on the table, twitched slightly, as if caught between the urge to reach for hers and the fear of crossing a line. He exhaled slowly, and in that sound Emma heard something she hadn't expected: relief. You don't realize what you're giving me, he murmured. You think it's small, but it's not. Emma swallowed hard. She wasn't sure what to do with the way he said it, the way it wrapped around her like a confession. To break the intensity, she smiled faintly and teased, well, maybe you just haven't met enough talkative bookstore clerks. That earned her a laugh, short, rough-edged, but genuine. It was the kind of laugh that made her chest ache because she could tell he didn't use it often. They lingered there, trading small stories. Emma told him about funny customers at the shop, the man who argued about prices on secondhand books, the child who tried to sneak comics under his jacket but returned them the next day with an apology note. He listened with quiet delight, his lips curving when she painted scenes with her words. In turn, he shared fragments of his life, though carefully chosen. He spoke of traveling before the accident, of cities he had memorized by sound. Rome with its fountains, New York with its endless horns, Paris with laughter spilling from cafes. But whenever Emma leaned closer, asking when or how he had gone there, he deflected. It was years ago, he would say, or business took me places. Always vague, always just enough to hint but never reveal. Emma noticed. She noticed everything. The way his shoulders stiffened when talk veered too close to his present life. The way he gripped his cane a little tighter whenever the silence grew too honest. And though she didn't press, a question lingered in her chest like a stone. What is he hiding from me? The pastries dwindled to crumbs. The cups emptied. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist, leaving the city glowing under wet street lamps. Emma realized how late it had become. Her mother would be waiting, yet the thought of leaving filled her with an ache she hadn't felt in years. He must have sensed her hesitation because he spoke softly. You should go. It's getting late. Emma bit her lip. What about you? I'll be fine, he said. I know this city better than most, even without eyes. The certainty in his voice almost convinced her. Almost, but she couldn't quite shake the image of him walking alone into the night, cane tapping against slick sidewalks. She wanted to stay, wanted to offer something more. Maybe I could walk with you, she offered quietly. Just part of the way. He smiled faintly, a smile that felt both grateful and pained. You don't have to. I know, she whispered, but I want to. They stepped out together, the cool night air wrapping around them. The street smelled of wet stone and roasted chestnuts from a vendor packing up his cart. Cars passed, splashing puddles that shimmered under neon signs. Emma walked beside him, her hands in her pockets, her heart unsteady. For a long stretch, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, alive, as though words might break something delicate between them. Finally, he said, Tonight was unexpected. Emma smiled faintly. Good unexpected or bad? Dangerous, he answered, his voice low, her breath caught. Dangerous. He turned his head toward her, his pale eyes unreadable. Because I almost forgot myself. And forgetting can cost more than you know. The words sent a shiver through her, though she didn't fully understand them. She wanted to ask, to pry, but the weight in his tone told her not to. Instead, she stayed quiet, matching his pace as they crossed a small square lit by flickering lamps. When they reached a corner where their paths would part, he stopped. "Thank you, Emma." She froze. How do you know my name?" He smiled faintly. "You said it once. On the phone when you answered your boss earlier at the cafe." I remembered. Her cheeks warmed. "You listen too well." "It's the only thing I can still do," he said. A taxi slowed nearby, splashing water as it pulled to the curb. He gestured toward it, as if offering her the safer choice. But Emma shook her head. "I can walk. It's not far." He nodded once, then hesitated. "I hope this isn't the last time we talk." Her chest fluttered. She wanted to promise it wasn't, but fear held her back. So she just whispered, "Me too." They parted in the rain-slicked street, Emma's footsteps echoing against the pavement, his cane tapping a rhythm that lingered in her ears long after he was gone. She didn't know his full name, didn't know his secrets, didn't know that the man she just shared tea and laughter with was far more than he pretended to be. But she knew this. For the first time in years, she felt seen. And somewhere deep inside, she feared that soon she'd discover why he had kept the truth hidden. The next morning felt heavy in Emma's chest, as though sleep had been only a thin veil over restless thoughts. She woke early, the gray light of dawn slipping through the cracks in her curtains, her mother still asleep in the small adjoining room. Emma brewed tea quietly, her mind replaying every moment from the night before. The laughter, the quiet confessions, the way he listened as though her words were stars scattered across a dark sky. She tried to push it away, to bury it beneath routine. There was rent to worry about, prescriptions to pick up, and a shift at the bookstore that would drag long hours across her shoulders. Yet each time she glanced at the folded blindfold on her dresser, a smile tugged at her lips before she could stop it. By the time she reached the bookstore, the city was fully awake. Buses groaning at stops, school children skipping along sidewalks, shopkeepers sweeping rainwater off stoops. She unlocked the shop door, inhaling the familiar scent of dust and paper. The bell above the entrance chimed as her boss shuffled in, muttering about newspapers. "Comfort," he said gruffly, tossing the latest edition onto the counter. "Thought you'd like this one. Big story today. Some people get their names printed for actually doing something in this world." Emma forced a polite smile, brushing dust off a stack of second-hand novels. She didn't think much of it until her eyes drifted to the newspaper, the bold black letters catching her attention. And then her heart stopped. The front page showed a man in a tailored suit, standing beneath a wide arch of ribbon at the opening of a new children's hospital wing. His pale eyes were unmistakable. Even in glossy ink, they carried the same quiet strength she had seen across the cafe table. His name blazed beneath the photo: Adam Bessler, millionaire philanthropist and investor. Emma's breath hitched. Her hand trembled as she snatched up the paper, reading the lines again and again, as though her vision might be betraying her. But there was no mistake. The man she had laughed with in the dark cinema, the man who had leaned toward her voice as if it were light, was no ordinary stranger. He was one of the wealthiest men in the city. The air left her lungs. Her boss droned on about stock deliveries, oblivious, but Emma barely heard him. She clutched the paper until the edges crumpled, shame and fury swirling together in her chest. All night, he had let her believe he was simply a man with scars, a man who carried silence and shadows but nothing more. And all the while, he had hidden an empire behind his calm smile. Memories flashed. The hesitation when she asked about his work, the clipped word investments, the guarded way he spoke. She had thought it was pain, but now she saw it for what it was, a lie. Why hadn't he trusted her? Why had he let her spill pieces of her soul, her worries about bills, her sick mother, her small life patched together with tape and hope, while he kept everything locked away? Did he think she was too poor, too small to deserve the truth? Her throat burned as she folded the newspaper, shoving it beneath the counter as if hiding it could erase the ache. Customers trickled in, asking for recommendations, buying dog-eared classics, but Emma went through the motions like a ghost. Each time the bell above the door chimed, her heart leapt foolishly, expecting him to walk in with that cane and that soft, searching smile. By afternoon, the weight inside her grew unbearable. She slipped into the storeroom, sitting on a crate among stacks of unsorted books. She pressed her hands over her face, fighting tears she refused to let fall. "You're such a fool," she whispered to herself. "He wasn't just a man. He was testing you, playing with you." Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, soft from years of struggle. "Honesty is all we have left, Emma. Never give it away cheap." But she had. She had handed it to him freely, only to discover that he had guarded his truth behind walls of wealth. When her shift ended, Emma walked home with the newspaper folded under her arm. The city felt colder, harsher, every light too bright, every shadow too heavy. Rain threatened but didn't fall, the air charged like the moment before a storm. She clutched her cardigan tighter, willing her heart to harden, telling herself that last night had been nothing more than a cruel mistake. Her mother looked up from the worn armchair when Emma entered their tiny apartment. "How was work, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice weary but kind. Emma forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. It was fine, but inside nothing was fine. She had opened her heart to a man who lived in a world galaxies away from hers, a world of headlines and hospitals built in his name. And she knew, with painful certainty, that he hadn't thought she deserved the truth. The bell above the bookstore door chimed, its familiar notes slicing through the quiet rustle of pages and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Emma, bent over a stack of newly arrived paperbacks, lifted her head with automatic politeness ready on her lips. But when her eyes fell on the figure in the doorway, the words froze. Adam stood there, rain clinging to his coat, his cane steady in his hand. Droplets slid down his hair and traced the line of his jaw, his pale eyes fixed in that unfocused way that always seemed to search beyond what others could see. He wasn't flanked by assistants or dressed in a pristine suit. He was simply himself, damp, weary, and vulnerable. Emma's breath caught. Instinct screamed at her to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen him. The newspaper headline burned in her memory, the bold letters of his name, the photo of him cutting ribbons with a smile polished for the cameras. Rage mixed with hurt, rising in her chest. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. He stepped forward slowly, guided more by the sound of her voice than the cluttered shelves around him. His hand brushed the counter until he found its edge, fingers resting there as though grounding himself. "Because if I don't tell you the truth now," he said softly, "I'll lose more than sight ever took from me." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to stay strong, to push him away, but the quiet sincerity in his tone cracked something inside her. "You lied," she said, sharper than she intended. "I hid," he corrected gently. His fingers tapped the wood once, then stilled. "I've lived in shadows since the accident. Women only ever saw my name or my blindness, never me. I thought if you knew both, you'd leave like the others." Her hands clenched at her sides, So you let me spill my whole life to you, about my mother, about the bookstore, while you kept everything locked away. Do you know how small that makes me feel? How foolish. His jaw tightened, his pale eyes lowering though they couldn't focus. I know, and I hate myself for it. The rain outside drummed harder, filling the silence between them. Emma shook her head, her voice breaking. You should have trusted me. I know, he whispered. He leaned forward, desperation threading through his words. But trust doesn't come easy when you've been left behind 15 times. 15 women walked away the moment they saw this cane. Every time I thought I was less than a man. Then you came along and for the first time someone stayed. Someone laughed. Someone gave me back the world with just her voice. I was terrified of losing that. Emma felt her defenses waver, her eyes burning with unshed tears. He was so raw, so stripped of the arrogance she had expected from a man of wealth. For all his power, he stood before her now like someone asking not for admiration, not for forgiveness, but for a chance to be real. You should have trusted me, she repeated, softer this time, her heart aching at the fragility in his voice. I will, he promised, his voice rough but steady. I will spend the rest of my life proving that I can. If you'll let me. The silence pulsed, fragile and heavy, filled only by the rain pounding on the windows. Emma's chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to step closer, to let his words wash away the bitterness that still clung to her. But scars of disappointment whispered caution. Adam straightened, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed his cane. Nights are dark for me no matter where I go, he said, his tone breaking. But when you speak, I see again. If you walk away now, I return to darkness. Not the blindness, I've learned to live with that, but the kind of darkness that no man can survive. Emma's tears finally spilled, hot and unrelenting. For all his wealth, his charities, his influence, Adam Bessler stood in her little bookstore begging not for anything money could buy, but for her forgiveness, for her voice, for her presence. Slowly, as though moving in a dream, she stepped out from behind the counter. Her trembling hands reached up, brushing the rain still clinging to his skin. His breath caught as her fingers traced the line of his cheek, the curve of his jaw. His own hands lifted hesitantly, reverently, until they touched her face, memorizing her features the only way he could. You're even more beautiful than I imagined, he murmured, his voice breaking with wonder. Emma let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half relief. You can't see me. Adam smiled faintly. I can. Right here. He tapped his chest with one hand. The rain outside swelled louder, the sound wrapping around them like music. And in that tiny bookstore, between cracked shelves and pages softened by years of hands, Emma leaned into his embrace. For the first time in days, the anger inside her softened, replaced by something scarier, hope. She didn't know if trust could be rebuilt overnight. But as his arms closed gently around her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about perfection or truth from the very start. Sometimes, love was about staying when the world told you to leave. The rain had eased by the time the bookstore lights dimmed for closing, but Emma and Adam still stood together among the shelves, their embrace lingering as though neither dared to let go first. Emma could feel his heartbeat through his coat, steady yet unguarded, and for the first time since discovering the truth, she didn't see him as a headline in a newspaper. She saw only the man who had listened to her voice in the dark, the man who had laughed when she described invisible shoes squeaking across a cinema floor. She pulled back slightly, her hands still resting against his chest. I don't know if I can just forget, she admitted, her voice fragile but honest. You hid a part of yourself that mattered. It hurt. I don't want you to forget, Adam replied quietly. His pale eyes searched the space between them, unseeing yet full of determination. I want you to remember, to hold me accountable, because if I lose your trust again, I lose everything worth holding on to. Her throat tightened. Part of her still feared the gulf between their worlds. His skyscrapers and foundations, her second-hand bookstore and unpaid bills. But as she studied the lines of his face, softened by vulnerability, she realized that love wasn't about matching worlds. It was about choosing to build a bridge between them. She exhaled slowly, stepping back. One bridge at a time, she whispered. A faint smile curved his lips. I'll take that. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm neither of them expected. Adam returned to the bookstore often, sometimes under the pretense of buying books he couldn't read, sometimes simply to hear Emma describe the world around them. She would laugh, rolling her eyes as she read aloud passages from novels or painted pictures of the bustling street outside. He would listen, always listening, as though her words stitched light into his shadows. Customers began to whisper about the mysterious man who came so often, about the way Emma's face seemed brighter when he was near. Her boss grumbled at first, muttering about distractions, but even he softened when Adam quietly donated a shipment of new books under the store's name. Emma confronted him about it later, hands on her hips, but Adam only smiled and said, "You deserved better shelves." Their evenings often ended with walks through the rain-washed city. Emma would describe the glow of neon signs, the crooked umbrella of a street vendor, the laughter spilling from a crowded diner. Adam, in turn, would tell her how the world sounded to him, the difference between hurried footsteps and hesitant ones, the way silence could reveal more than noise ever did. Slowly, Emma began to realize that he hadn't lost everything the night he lost his sight. He had learned to see differently. But the real test came one evening when Adam invited her to a charity gala. Emma balked at the idea, clutching the simple dress she owned as though it were made of paper. "I'll look ridiculous next to you," she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. Adam reached for her hand, his touch steady. "You're the only one I want next to me. Let the rest of the world see what I see when you speak." At the gala, cameras flashed, people whispered, but Adam held her hand tightly, introducing her not as a curiosity, not as a fling, but as the woman who had brought him back to life. Emma trembled under the weight of so many eyes, but when she glanced at him and saw the ease in his smile, she remembered the dark cinema where it had all begun. To him, none of these lights mattered. Only her voice did. Later that night, as they walked home away from the glitter and noise, Adam stopped beneath a street lamp. The rain had returned in a soft drizzle, glistening on his dark hair. He turned his face toward her voice, his hand finding hers. "You made me see again," he said, his voice breaking with sincerity. "Not with my eyes, with something stronger." Emma's heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes. She squeezed his hand. "And you made me believe again that my voice, my life, wasn't too small to matter." They stood there in the drizzle, the city humming around them, two souls stitched together not by wealth or appearances, but by the courage to stay when it was easier to leave. For Adam, love was no longer a luxury for the sighted. For Emma, love was no longer something reserved for stories in books. Together, they had written their own story, one that began in the dark but ended in light. In the end, Emma realized that it didn't matter that she had sat next to a millionaire without knowing. What mattered was that in the darkness of a cinema, when the world was blindfolded, she had been brave enough to speak, and he had been brave enough to listen. And that was how two strangers, who thought they had nothing, found everything in each other.